The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves as I stood outside Belmont's, the most exclusive restaurant in our city. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the warm, golden glow of crystal chandeliers, casting elegant shadows across white tablecloths and gleaming silverware. This was where my father had always dreamed of dining for his birthday, a dream that, according to my mother, was far beyond our family's reach. "Marcus, honey, you know we can't afford a place like that," she had said just 3 days earlier, her voice tinged with that familiar condescending tone that made my stomach clench. "Your father would understand. We'll do something nice at home instead." But what my mother didn't know, what none of my family knew, was that 6 months ago, everything had changed for me. According to YouTube analytics, 99.5% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. The tech startup I'd been quietly building in my spare time had been acquired by a Fortune 500 company for an amount that still made my head spin when I saw the numbers in my bank account. I hadn't told anyone yet, still processing the whirlwind of success that had transformed me from a struggling software developer into someone who could buy Belmont's entire wine collection without blinking. I had planned to surprise them all tonight, to finally reveal my success by treating my father to the birthday dinner he deserved. But my mother's dismissive words had stung deeper than I expected, awakening memories of a lifetime of similar dismissals, of being told I wasn't enough, couldn't achieve enough, would never amount to anything significant. "You're a dreamer, Marcus," she would say whenever I talked about my ambitions. "You need to be more realistic about your limitations." Those words had followed me through high school, through college, and even into my early career. Every small success I'd achieved had been met with skepticism, every failure magnified as proof of her predictions. Even my father, whom I adored, had slowly begun echoing her sentiments, their united front of low expectations becoming a wall I felt I could never scale. The memory that hurt most was from 2 years ago, when I'd tried to explain my business idea to them over Sunday dinner. My mother had actually laughed, not the warm, encouraging laugh of a parent, but the sharp, dismissive laugh reserved for foolish children. "Oh, Marcus," she had said, reaching across the table to pat my hand like I was still 8 years old. "Everyone thinks they're going to be the next big thing in technology. You have a perfectly good job. Why risk everything on some fantasy?" My father had nodded along, adding, "Your mother's right, son. It's better to be grateful for what you have than to chase pipe dreams." That night, I had gone home to my small apartment and stared at my computer screen for hours, their words echoing in my mind. But instead of giving up, I had channeled that pain into determination. Every line of code I wrote, every late night I spent debugging and perfecting my software was fueled by the need to prove them wrong. Now, standing outside Belmont's, I realized I had the power to do more than just prove them wrong. I could show them exactly how wrong they had been, in a way that would make the lesson unforgettable. I pulled out my phone and called my mother. "Hello, dear." Her voice came through warm but tired. "How was your day?" "Hi, Mom. I was thinking about Dad's birthday dinner tomorrow. You know what? You're absolutely right about Belmont's being too expensive. But what if I told you I found a way to get us a reservation there anyway?" There was a pause. "Marcus, I hope you haven't done something foolish like put it on credit cards." "We've talked about living within your means." I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "Don't worry about the money, Mom. Just trust me on this one. Can you get everyone together tomorrow at 7? Dad, Sarah, Uncle Jim, Aunt Patricia, the whole family?" "Well, I suppose if you've figured out some way to make it work." Her voice carried that familiar doubt, as if she were indulging a child's impossible request. "But Marcus, if this falls through, your father will be so disappointed." "It won't fall through. I promise you that." After ending the call, I walked into Belmont's and was immediately greeted by the maitre d', a distinguished man in his 50s with silver hair and a perfectly pressed suit. "Good evening, Mr. Chen," he said with a warm smile. "Will you be dining with us tonight?" "Not tonight, James. But I need to discuss arrangements for tomorrow evening. My family will be joining me for my father's birthday." "Of course, sir." "The private dining room?" "Actually, I want them to experience the main dining room first." "But James, I need you to do me a favor, and it's going to sound unusual." I explained my plan, watching as James's professional composure flickered with surprise, then understanding, and finally something that might have been admiration. "I see," he said slowly. "And you're certain this is how you want to handle the revelation?" "I've been thinking about this moment for months. My family needs to understand not just that I've succeeded, but how completely they misjudged me." James nodded. "Very well, Mr. Chen. We'll make sure everything goes according to your specifications." The next evening arrived with an unseasonable warmth, as if the weather itself wanted to be part of this pivotal moment. I had spent the day alternating between excitement and nervousness, rehearsing in my mind how the evening would unfold. I arrived at Belmont's early and watched from a corner table as my family approached the entrance. There was my father, wearing his best suit, the same navy blue one he'd worn to my college graduation and every important occasion since. My mother walked beside him, elegant as always, but with that slightly pinched expression she wore whenever she was worried about money. My sister Sarah and her husband followed, along with my uncle and aunt, all of them looking slightly overwhelmed by the restaurant's grandeur. I watched my mother's face as they entered, saw her eyes widen at the opulent interior, the soft jazz playing from the piano in the corner, the murmur of well-dressed diners engaged in quiet conversation. This was a world she had always admired from afar, but never thought she could access. "Excuse me," I heard her say to James at the podium, her voice carrying that apologetic tone she used when she felt out of place. "We have a reservation? Under Chen? Though I have to admit, I'm not sure how my son managed to—" She trailed off, clearly embarrassed. James smiled warmly. "Of course, Mrs. Chen. We've been expecting you. Right this way, please." I watched as he led them to a prime table in the center of the main dining room, exactly as I had requested. They settled in awkwardly, my father looking around with wonder, while my mother studied the menu with barely concealed shock at the prices. "Mom," I heard Sarah whisper, "are you sure Marcus can afford this? Some of these entrees cost more than I spend on groceries in a week." My mother shook her head slightly. "I don't know, honey. I really don't know what he was thinking." After giving them a few minutes to absorb their surroundings, I stood up from my corner table and walked over to them. "Hey, everyone. Sorry I'm a little late." "Marcus!" My father stood up, his face lighting up with genuine joy. "Son, this place is incredible. I can't believe we're really here. Happy birthday, Dad." I hugged him tightly, feeling the familiar comfort of his embrace. Whatever issues I had with my mother's expectations, my love for my father was uncomplicated and pure. As we all sat down, I could see my mother's anxiety written across her face. She kept glancing around the restaurant, probably calculating the cost of everything in sight. "Marcus," she said in a low voice, "I hope you have a plan for how we're paying for this." I brought my credit card just in case, but— "Mom, relax. Everything is taken care of." "But how? Your salary is good, but it's not this good. Did you get a promotion, a bonus?" I smiled mysteriously. "Something like that." The evening progressed beautifully. My father was in his element, delighting in every course, asking the sommelier about wine pairings, treating the whole experience like the adventure it was for him. But I could see the tension in my mother's shoulders, the way she barely touched her food because she was too worried about the bill that would eventually come. About halfway through the meal, she excused herself to go to the restroom. I knew this was part of her pattern when she was anxious. She would step away to collect herself, probably rehearsing a speech about financial responsibility that she planned to deliver later. While she was gone, my father leaned over to me. "Son, I don't know how you managed this, but this is the best birthday I've ever had. Your mother is worried about the cost, but I want you to know how much this means to me." "I'm glad, Dad. You deserve this and so much more." When my mother returned, I noticed she looked even more tense than before. She sat down heavily and immediately reached for her water glass. "Marcus," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "I was just talking to another diner in the ladies' room. She told me that dinner for 7 here typically runs well over $1,000. Please tell me you didn't put this on credit cards." The moment had arrived. I had orchestrated this entire evening to reach this precise point, where her concern about money would peak and her assumptions about my limitations would be most firmly entrenched. "Actually, Mom, there's something I need to tell all of you." I stood up, my heart racing. "The reason I could afford to bring you here tonight is because 6 months ago, my company was acquired. The pipe dream you laughed at, the fantasy you told me to give up, it sold for $47 million. The silence at the table was absolute. My father's fork froze halfway to his mouth. Sarah's eyes went wide. My uncle leaned forward as if he hadn't heard correctly. But it was my mother's face that I focused on, the way the color drained from her cheeks, the way her mouth opened slightly in shock, the way her eyes darted around the table as if looking for some indication that this was a joke. "47 million, Sarah whispered. "Marcus, are you serious?" "Dead serious, but that's not even the best part." I smiled, feeling a surge of satisfaction that was both thrilling and slightly uncomfortable. "The reason James greeted us so warmly tonight, the reason we got the best table in the house without a reservation, is because 3 weeks ago, I bought this restaurant." If the silence before had been absolute, this silence was cosmic. I could hear the jazz piano from across the room, the gentle clinking of silverware from other tables, the soft murmur of conversations that seemed to be happening in another world entirely. My mother's hands were trembling slightly. You own this restaurant?" "I own this restaurant, Mom. The same restaurant you told me 3 days ago that I couldn't afford to eat at." As if on cue, James appeared at our table. "Excuse me for the interruption," he said with perfect timing. "Mr. Chen, the kitchen wanted me to tell you that the wine you selected from your personal collection is being decanted now, and your pastry chef has prepared something special for your father's birthday." "My personal collection?" My father looked dazed. "Marcus, what is happening?" James smiled. "Your son has exquisite taste in wine, Mr. Chen. He's been building quite an impressive cellar since he acquired Belmont's." After James left, the silence returned, but it felt different now, heavier, charged with the weight of years of assumptions being shattered in real time. My mother was the first to speak, her voice barely, above a whisper. "I don't understand. When did all this happen? How did we not know?" "You didn't know because you never asked about my work in any meaningful way. Every time I tried to explain what I was building, you shut me down. You told me I was a dreamer, that I needed to be more realistic about my limitations." "But Marcus, do you remember 2 years ago when I tried to tell you about my software platform?" You literally laughed at me, Mom. You patted my hand like I was a child and told me everyone thinks they're going to be the next big thing. The shame in her eyes was painful to witness, but I couldn't stop now. Years of suppressed hurt were pouring out of me. Every success I've ever had, you've minimized. Every dream I've shared, you've dismissed. And the one time I needed your support the most, when I was taking the biggest risk of my life, you told me to give up and be grateful for what I had. My father reached across the table, his hand shaking slightly. Son, we never meant to hurt you. We were just trying to protect you from disappointment. Protect me? Dad, I love you, but look around. Does this look like disappointment to you? I built something incredible, something that changed my life and could have changed yours too if you had just believed in me. Sarah spoke up, her voice tentative. Marcus, we had no idea. You never told us how well things were going. Because every time I tried to share good news, it was met with skepticism. Every small victory was treated like a fluke. I stopped telling you about my successes because I got tired of having them questioned. The sommelier appeared with a bottle of wine that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, but no one seemed to notice. We were all trapped in this moment of revelation, of years of family dynamics being turned inside out. My mother was crying now, not the dramatic tears of someone seeking sympathy, but the quiet, devastated tears of someone confronting a terrible truth about themselves. Marcus, I'm so sorry, she whispered. I thought I was being realistic. I thought I was saving you from heartbreak. But whose heartbreak were you really worried about, Mom? Mine or yours? Because it seems to me like you were more concerned with being right about my limitations than you were with my actual happiness or success. The words hung in the air like an accusation, which I suppose they were. I could see the impact they had on everyone at the table, but particularly on my mother, who seemed to be shrinking into herself. My father cleared his throat. Son, what do you want from us? How do we move forward from this? It was a good question, and one I had been grappling with for weeks as I planned this evening. What did I want? Revenge, vindication, an apology? All of the above? I want things to be different going forward, I said finally. I want you to see me as I actually am, not as the limited person you've always assumed I was. I want you to be proud of what I've accomplished instead of surprised by it. We are proud, my mother said quickly. Marcus, we are so proud of you. I can't believe what you've built, what you've achieved. Are you proud of me, or are you proud of the money? Because there's a difference. The question seemed to hit her like a physical blow. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her wrestling with the honest answer. Both, she said finally. I'm ashamed to admit it, but both. The money makes it impossible to dismiss what you've done, which I realize is terrible of me. Her honesty surprised me. I had expected denials, justifications, anything but this raw admission of her own prejudices. Why? I asked. Why was it so hard to believe in me? She was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands folded in her lap. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red but clear. Because believing in you meant admitting that all the dreams I gave up on might have been possible too. It was easier to convince myself that big dreams don't come true than to face the fact that I had stopped trying to make mine come true. The admission hung between us like a bridge I hadn't expected her to build. Suddenly, her years of discouragement took on a different meaning, not malice, but fear. Fear that if she encouraged me to dream big and I succeeded, she would have to confront her own abandoned ambitions. What dreams did you give up on? I asked gently. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. I wanted to be an architect. I had plans, sketches, a whole portfolio. But when I got pregnant with you, everyone told me to be practical, to focus on stable income. so I became an accountant instead. Mom, you know it's not too late, right? You're 54, not 94. She shook her head. It's different now. I've been out of it too long. And I was too young and inexperienced to build a successful tech company, but I did it anyway. For the first time all evening, she smiled. A real smile, not the forced politeness she usually wore when she was uncomfortable. The rest of the dinner passed in a different atmosphere entirely. The tension that had defined our family dynamic for years seemed to be dissolving, replaced by something more honest, more real. My father asked genuine questions about my business, listening with fascination as I explained the technology and the market. Sarah wanted to know about the acquisition process. Even my uncle and aunt, who had been silent observers to this family drama, began engaging with authentic curiosity. But it was my mother's transformation that struck me most. The defensive, dismissive woman who had walked into Belmont's had been replaced by someone who seemed genuinely interested in understanding not just what I had achieved, but how I had achieved it. I have a confession, she said, as we were finishing dessert. I've been following your LinkedIn profile for months. I saw the updates about your company, but I convinced myself it was just, I don't know, marketing speak? I didn't let myself believe it was as big as it sounded. Why? Because if it was true, it meant I had been wrong about you for years. And being wrong about something that important felt impossible to face. As the evening wound down, James approached our table one final time. Mr. Chen, I hope everything has been to your satisfaction. Perfect as always, James. Thank you for helping make this evening special. It was my pleasure, sir. And may I say, your father seems to have truly enjoyed his birthday celebration. After James left, my father reached across the table and took my hand. Son, I owe you an apology, not just for tonight, but for years of not seeing you clearly. You've built something remarkable, and more than that, you've become a remarkable man. Thanks, Dad. That means everything to me. There's just one thing I don't understand, he continued. Why reveal it this way? Why the surprise, the drama? I considered the question carefully. Because I needed you to feel what it was like to underestimate me. I needed you to experience the shock of discovering that your assumptions were wrong. If I had just announced my success over coffee, you would have congratulated me and moved on. But this way, you'll remember how it felt to be completely wrong about my capabilities. My mother winced. It was quite a shock. Good. I want you to remember this feeling the next time you're tempted to tell someone they're dreaming too big. As we prepared to leave, I realized that the revenge I had planned, the dramatic revelation designed to make my family feel foolish for underestimating me, had transformed into something more complex. Yes, I had proven them wrong in the most spectacular way possible. Yes, I had forced them to confront their own limiting beliefs. But in the process, I had also opened a door to a more honest relationship with them, one built on who I actually was rather than who they had assumed I was. Outside the restaurant, as we said our goodbyes, my mother pulled me aside. Marcus, I know I can't undo years of discouraging you, but I want you to know that from now on, when you tell me about your dreams, I'm going to listen differently. What does that mean? It means I'm going to ask myself whether I'm responding to your actual limitations or to my own fears. And I'm going to try very hard to choose your dreams over my fears. Walking back to my car, I realized that the evening had accomplished something I hadn't expected. I had set out to prove my family wrong about my capabilities, but in doing so, I had also discovered something important about their motivations. They hadn't doubted me out of malice, but out of their own complicated relationship with ambition and disappointment. The revenge I had planned had become something more like a revelation. For them, but also for me. I had learned that sometimes the people who limit us aren't enemies to be defeated, but fellow travelers carrying their own fears and disappointments. And sometimes the most powerful way to change someone's mind isn't to argue with them, but to show them a reality so different from their expectations that they have no choice but to see things differently. 3 months later, I would learn that my mother had enrolled in architecture classes at the community college. 6 months after that, she would show me her first new design in 30 years. A sketch of a small house with clean lines and large windows that seemed to reach toward the sky. When I asked her what had inspired her to go back to her dreams, she smiled and said, "Someone once told me it's never too late to be who you really are." But that night, walking to my car after the most emotionally complex dinner of my life, all I knew was that I had finally shown my family who I really was. And in doing so, I had learned who they really were too. The revenge had been sweet, but the understanding that came with it was sweeter still.